It was around 11 p.m. when I was playing a card game and drinking with Steven and Harris, my two idiotic friends. It had been so long since the three of us got together and had a sleepover like this, and we were enjoying it until Harris used his substandard brain to keep the entertainment going. He suggested that we go to the infamous villa on the hilltop, a recent hot topic for being one of the most haunted places. I'm not a fan of haunted or supernatural things, not because I don't believe in them or anything, but instead, I'm a weak-hearted person. I even clench my eyes closed whenever we decide to visit a haunted house, or even people's houses during Halloween, which, by the way, are all Harris's ideas since he's the kind of person who cannot resist being involved in supernatural stuff. I don't even want to think about where it would lead us someday. Well, I immediately rejected his offer, while Steven, his partner in crime, accepted it. You know how friends are, right? The more you resist them, the more they force you to do things. The same happened to me as I found myself walking out of the house a few minutes later. Why in the world are we doing this? My tone was defeated as I asked them. There are 3 reasons for this. 1, we get to hang out together. 2, it's thrilling. And 3, we get to find out if the rumor is true or not. He counted these on his fingers. I knew I had no choice of winning this argument with him, so I took a long sigh and got in the car. As we were driving toward the villa, we noticed a girl sitting in the middle of the road, which caused Steven to stop the car. Well, finding someone at midnight in the middle of the road near a haunted villa didn't seem like a good sign to me, so I asked them not to step out the car. Why? I couldn't believe my ears when Harris asked me this. Don't you find it strange? What would someone be doing in the middle of nowhere away from the resting area? I said in a low tone, fearing that she would hear me. And to prove my bad luck, the girl lifted her head and looked straight at us, making our breath get stuck in our throats. Should I turn back? Steven asked me in a slightly trembling voice. Don't be stupid, guys. What if she is someone in need of help? Yes, you guessed right. It was indeed Harris who said that. I sometimes swear he ignores all the red flags intentionally to get us closer to our deaths. Before any of us could say anything else, the girl walked to our car and knocked on the mirror. What I kept repeating in my brain was, "Don't do it, Harris." But that idiot, I swear I want to smack the shit out of him, pulled it down. The girl stared at each of our faces one by one before saying, "If you're going to the villa, turn back." Right after saying that, she walked away. It was strange. A ghost who didn't want to haunt us. Maybe Harris was right about her not being a ghost. But the bird brain laughed and said, "Oh, this is just like a typical horror movie. I bet there is some sort of illegal thing going on there. I'm supposed to expose it to the world." My mouth dropped at how dumbfounded I felt at the moment. This guy was insane. He was ready to kill us all. But my shock got doubled when I saw Steven chuckling along with him. Didn't these two have an ounce of common sense or even a sense of danger in them? And since I was here and these two were in the majority, I had no other choice but to follow along, even though I wasn't feeling good about any of this. As we reached the villa, we could see how huge and luxurious it might have been for its owner. But whatever the aura, it reeked of blood for some reason. I could feel the chill, but I couldn't understand what I was supposed to do if we were to face a real threat. When the 3 of us were walking around it, I was only thinking of coming up with a solution. For some strange reason, nothing about this villa felt supernatural, even though it was giving off such a menacing aura, and judging by the surroundings, there was also a feeling of someone's presence. It was like someone was living there. Maybe that idiot was right about this place being exploited for some illegal means, but if that were the case, we were in huge trouble. As I got lost in my thoughts, I didn't even realize that I was walking ahead of those two until I heard a thud sound coming from behind. I turned around to see Steven on the ground unconscious, while Harris's wide eyes were fixated on the man holding an iron rod. He had an evil grin on his face as he looked at the two of us. It was like he didn't even care that we were outnumbering him. Felt as if he were overpowered by that man. I remember him. This man was on the news a few days ago. He was a psycho killer who had broken out of the prison and was undetectable even by the FBI. He slowly walked towards us, and our steps automatically started to retreat. And within a few seconds, we were running inside the villa trying to escape from the man. Harris's pale expression had completely gone off the chart, as this outcome never even crossed his mind. I could believe it. Was he this oblivious to the dangers of this world? But how? As we were trying to find a place to hide, we came across a room that seemed rather dark and huge. There was a weird metallic stench coming from inside. But we had no other choice if we wanted to save our lives. We immediately went in and locked it from the inside. But as we turned the lights on, our bodies completely froze from the horrifying scene in front of us. The source of the stench were these rotting dead bodies. I couldn't hold it in and threw up, and so did Harris. "What should we do?" His voice was shaking so much that I could barely understand his words. "Shouldn't we call 911? I looked at him with my trembling voice. "Yes, you're right." He took out his phone and dialed the numbers, and the moment operator picked up, he started explaining everything in his panicked voice. The response that they would be here in a few minutes, and we needed to hold it by then. We could feel that man right outside the room's door, and we were scared as hell that he would walk in any minute. His murderous aura looming over us was so high that it felt alarming. "Do you think Steven's still alive?" I whispered, hoping the man doesn't listen to our voices. My fellow quivering friend couldn't speak a word and just kept looking at me with fearful eyes. We were lucky enough that a team of cops reached the villa and arrested the man. And as we got out of the room, Harris passed out. The two of them were taken to the hospital, and luckily Steven wasn't dead either, which I couldn't understand. But by looking at all the dead bodies in the room were of females, it was possible that his victims were not men. When the police were announcing the victim list on the news, there was a picture of a girl that seemed familiar. So I tried looking hard to recognize her. And that's when it hit. It was her. That girl who warned us from entering the villa. So there were ghosts in there. Just not the kind we thought. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Over the years, I have heard many men complaining about how it's impossible to please a woman. From my best friend Tommy to my grandfather Maynard, they all kept saying making a woman happy is no easy job. None of them were ever able to truly claim that they could ever understand how to make them happy. But it wasn't a tad bit hard for me, because I had made a lot of women happy over the years. But on one very unusual Wednesday afternoon, I made one woman a little happier than intended. My name's Charlie Huffman. I'm a 34-year-old masseur, and I've been doing this for the past 12 years of my life. All my life, since I started giving out massages to women, I never once heard any of them complain about it. But they did complain a lot about how unhappy their lives were, or how their husbands or boyfriends had no clue about how to make things right. I was so good at my job that once a woman received a message from me, they would insist on being my client. Because of that very reason, I had to turn away most of them. I'm a human just like the rest of you, so I'm also selfish and greedy like that. The only clients I didn't turn away were those who could offer me something better, something interesting in return. Some were ready to offer me tons of money, while some were ready to give me their gorgeous bodies. I have no idea how I developed such interesting and amazing techniques to satisfy them, but it was so clear that they all loved letting me take away all the stresses in their lives. It was one day when I was giving a massage when I received a special request from a rich lady named Patricia Miller, who had recently transferred to the town to give her a massage. It was her first time, so I thought I would accept it and see what happened. Her special request was that I go to her house instead of her coming to my place, so I told the servant who came with the request that I would be charging her 3 times more if I would go there, to which she agreed. I was supposed to go and give her a massage on Wednesday at 11 a.m., but I reached 8 minutes early. She had already prepared everything that was needed for the massage: a table, massage oil, lotions, creams, covers, towels, a foot roll bolster. Hell, she even had music prepared. I was quite impressed by that. "I've heard a lot about you from the ladies," she said in a low, seducing tone. I bet you have. My tone was rather sarcastic, but it was pretty obvious that she called me after hearing about me. Did you like the preparations I made for the session? She asked in the same low tone. Yes, I can see you've done your research. Shall we get started? I asked, while keeping my tone professional. She smiled at me, and then slipped the robe she was wearing. There was absolutely nothing underneath. I bet she may have heard that I prefer my clients to keep their underwear on, but it was clear she did not care about that. Since it was her first time, I thought I would let it slide. She lay down on the massage table, and I started giving her the best massage I could give, because I needed to take as much money from her as I could. As I was almost about to finish the massage, her body started to quiver. Her moans became louder, and her breathing became uneven. That's how I knew what was happening. The moment I finished giving her a massage, she turned to me and gave me a weirdly satisfied smile. When can I hope for the next session? She asked while catching up on her breath. I'll be quite busy for the next few days because of my tight schedule, so I'll let you know when I'm available. It was true that I was busy, but I knew exactly when slots were open. But since I did not want to give this woman, who was a bad sign, another massage, I made up an excuse. There are all kinds of women in this world. Dangerous, devious predators waiting to strike, and this woman was a piece of bad news waiting to ruin my career. It was because of my career that I became so good at differentiating women, and the best way for me to spot a dangerous woman was to see how she behaved with a man on their first meeting. That's how I figured her to be someone whom I should avoid at any cost. After taking my pay, I went back to my place, since there was already some sessions scheduled. The day went all right afterward, and once it was over, I went back to my place. For the past couple of days, I had started seeing this girl, and she was a real gem. But that night, I didn't get a call from her, nor did she answer mine. I thought she must be busy somewhere, so I let it go and went to sleep. The next day, I went to work at my usual time. But after waiting for about an hour for my first client, who was a regular, they did not show up. I called her, but she didn't answer. Thinking it might be a coincidence, I ignored it and started waiting for the next client. But weirdly enough, the second client didn't show up either. The limit of my patience was crossed when the third and fourth clients didn't show up either. Started to make me feel nervous and scared. That was when someone walked in. I felt thankful that at least not all of them canceled, but then I turned around face to face with her, and I froze. You're not too busy today, are you? It was Patricia. She was standing in front of me with a smile that disgusted me. Did you do something to my clients? I asked in an angry tone. Well, it's nobody's fault if there was a fire during a tea party. She laughed while coming closer. You're sick, I said with disgust in my voice, which she did not like. You said you were too busy to give me a massage, so I just made time for myself, she said. Why are you doing this? We don't even know each other. My voice was showing obvious signs of frustration. Maybe you don't remember me, but I do. I was one of your very first clients back in Manhattan when you started your career as a masseur, but all of a sudden you disappeared. You had no idea how devastated I was, since I was in love with you. But now we can be together, Charlie. She cupped my face while smiling and telling me all of this. Oh, hell no. Get out of here, woman. I don't even remember you. How can you think I would be with you? I slapped her hands away and said all of this in disgust. She became furious and started screaming and throwing things at me like a sociopath. No, actually, the way she was behaving, she was a sociopath. As I was trying to get away from her, she fell and hit her head on the massage table. I went to check if she was all right, but she wasn't breathing. I couldn't understand what I was supposed to do, and that's when I remembered something she said earlier. I threw scented candles on the curtains and drapes and caught it fire before it could spread in the area. I got out and locked the gate from outside. as I was walking away from the crime scene. I'm hoping for her body to burn down completely, or else I would have to come up with another lie to cover up.
We're going all the way back to the fall and winter of 1976 for this one. I know, I'm old. And granted, it's an old story, I promise you it's a good one. And in the summer of '76, my stupid self decided to move out to California. It was a well-meaning venture, I assure you, but a failed one in every conceivable aspect. I'd moved back to Arkansas less than a year after I moved out there, in a place like home, I suppose. But it also might have had something to do with a roommate I had when I was living in Sacramento. I was kind of a latecomer to the hippie movement, too young for the summer of love or the Vietnam protests, but seeing what the war did to my old man was just awful. I was young, real young when he came back, but I remember how different he was, just like a little piece of him was lost over there somehow. So it wasn't until the mid-70s that I got a wild hair up my butt to move out to San Francisco. My old man said he'd give me $100 in bus money if I stayed in high school long enough to graduate. So I did, and that same summer I headed out to San Fran on a Greyhound bus. Only I didn't quite make it. I stopped to see a guy I used to go to camp with in Sacramento and, well, just sort of stayed there. His parents offered me their spare room until I had enough money to carry on to Frisco, but living there made me feel like a bum. So, after squirreling away my first 2 paychecks, I decided to move into a shared apartment with 2 strangers. I meet up with a landlord at the house in question. We do a little walk around and he shows me where I'll be staying. The place was really nice. 3 separate bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, then all the ground floor facilities you could imagine. Kitchen, laundry room, TV room, garage, and the rent was enticingly low considering it was such a nice place. Both guys who lived there were out at work at the time, so I didn't get to meet any of them in advance, and obviously I wasn't permitted to nosy around in either of their bedrooms, so I really didn't get a sense of their personalities. But boy, was that about to change fast. A week later, I moved into the free room and met the 2 guys I'd be living with. One guy was named Richard, and the other guy was named Brad. Richard seemed kinda weird and untidy, but he seemed to mostly keep to himself, while Brad was much more friendly and outgoing. The thing was, Brad was moving out at some point over the following 2 weeks, and he wanted to give me the skinny on Richard before he left. Basically, he asked me how badly I needed the room. I told him real bad. It was either there or be homeless for the foreseeable future. And that's when he tells me that Richard can be cool when he wants to be, but he's definitely a few cards short of a full deck. I asked him what he means by that, and he just replies, "You'll see. Just keep your eye out for other apartments. The Bee generally has some good listings." At first, I just figured I'd waded into some slightly bitter roommate rivalry or politics, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I wasn't about to take sides after having been there for a grand total of 5 minutes, so I decided to play it diplomatically. But Brad was right. Richard was really weird. And not even weird in a fun, hippie way. He wasn't just waving his freak flag high, man. He was the freak flag, all on his own. First time I noticed was when I walked into the kitchen and Richard was sat at the table, reading a newspaper while holding an orange on top of his head. I asked him what he was doing, and he replied something like, "Absorbing vitamin C." I laughed, thinking he was just being silly, but when I turned to look at him, deadpan. The guy was deadly serious. I start explaining that's not how nutrition works, and he responds by telling me not to lecture him on what goes on in his body, how it was his body and he knew best about it. Naturally, I'm just like, okay dude, whatever you say, being as non-confrontational as possible, but the second I saw Brad, I conceded that he was right. Richard was crazy. Just how crazy, I had no idea, but I was sure about to find out. Richard's behavior remained curiously strange until the time that Brad moved out. It wasn't anything too scary, just stuff that made you roll your eyes or shake your head. Like at one point, we're eating dinner in front of the TV and Richard kind of sits up, stares into space for a moment, checks his own pulse, then says, "My heart just stopped beating." Brad seemed to have learned his lesson how to deal with such insane behavior because he falsely expresses some mild concern before suggesting Richard go take a nap, which he then does. Like some hypochondriac child, he finished his dinner, then goes to take a nap to alleviate his, what, his dead heart? I have no idea. Like I said, it wasn't scary, just kind of annoying. All the scary stuff came after Brad moved out. In fact, I think Brad was the only thing keeping a lid on Richard's behavior, because the same day Brad leaves is the same day Richard took a turn for the worse. So, like I've mentioned, I was working part-time in Sacramento, working 5-hour shifts, 4 days a week over at a nearby grocery store. One day I get back from my shift and Richard is standing over the bathroom sink, looking into a piece of broken mirror he'd propped up against the counter, and he's shaving all his hair off with a straight razor. "New haircut, buddy?" I remember asking him. "No, it's my skull. I think it's fractured." "Well, better get down to the hospital, Dickie boy. I hear those can be quite serious." I'd pretty much adopted Brad's approach wholesale by that point, kindly acknowledge and then disengage. But Richard responds by telling me that not only is his skull fractured, but that he can feel the plates moving around under his skin. Now, I'm no doctor, but I was 99% sure that that was impossible. And when I took a look at his request, there was no bruising, no blood, nothing. He's just having another one of his hypochondriac health scares. One time we're having dinner and Richard dropped me a compliment on my sausage gravy. It was like a double compliment, since it was my mom's secret recipe too. Turns out Brad was right. Richard could be nice when he wanted to be. But then he somehow managed to ruin the moment by saying something like, "Yeah, you're a real good cook. Much better than my mom. She used to try and poison me." Again, like the thing with the orange, I thought he was cracking a joke, so I laughed. But just like the thing with the orange, he simply stares at me, totally straight-faced, and I realized that it wasn't a joke. Only this time he's actually kind of offended that I didn't take him seriously, and that's the first time I saw Richard's mean side come out. He just stared at me, holding his knife and fork so hard his fists were shaking, and for a moment, I was actually scared he was just going to lunge at me from across the table. Instead, he picks up his plate, clears it, then marches off up to his room. A few hours later, he apologized for being so rude. I forgave him, and thus the cycle began anew. He'd act perfectly normal, then some weird outbursts would have me reconsidering Brad's suggestion on keeping an eye out for a new apartment. But until I could get more hours at the Safeway, that just wasn't an option for me. If you remember, I moved into the apartment during the fall, and Richard's behavior had been, at worst, amusingly bizarre for the majority of my stay. But the closer and closer we got to Christmas, the more he seemed to be slipping further and further into some downward spiral, and it had turned out to be one he'd never fully recover from. And it was definitely one that was made entirely worse by our use of recreational drugs. Like I said, late blooming hippie here, so when Richard suggested we get our hands on some pot and LSD, I just thought, groovy, you know? I didn't stop to consider that might be a terrible idea given his psychological issues. I actually kind of thought drugs might help him, but good lord did that turn out to be total naivety. Like I said, I thought a trip or two might help Richard out, give him a little perspective, but using drugs just sparked some sort of fire in him. He didn't just use them recreationally like me and my buddies had back in Little Rock. He used them habitually. He tripped every night for a week, until I literally had to hide the little eyedropper of acid I'd bought for us. and when he finally came out of it, he was all kinds of messed up. The day after he sobered up, I heard him coming down for breakfast, and when he walks into the kitchen area and I look up, I see he's as naked as the day he was born. Obviously, I'm like screaming, "Richard, put on some clothes for Christ's sake." He just responds with, "Why?" grabs some cereal, pours himself a bowl, then just sits down to eat. I was just getting progressively insanely more uncomfortable, and I couldn't bring myself to eat in front of a naked man like that, so I just got up and walked out. Huge mistake. Because I didn't properly address the whole nudity thing, he took that as him having a free pass. So, with an infuriatingly ever-increasing frequency, I'd have my roommate stumbling around the house, totally nude, while taking pulls on a bottle of Jack Daniels. Now, most people I've told this story to, they have said that they'd have been gone the moment the nudity thing started. But what can I say? It was the 70s. I was something of a freak myself, and if I couldn't handle one little weirdo in Sacramento, how was I going to stomach rubbing shoulders with hardcore Frisco hippies once I made it out there? Nope. Instead, the final straw was coming home to find him making cocktails. So like I said, I walk into the house one day and I hear the blender in the kitchen whirring. I wait for the break in the whirring to call out to him as I walk into the TV room. He had to walk that way to get to the kitchen, asking him what he's making. He just replies, "Cocktails," in this dull, flat tone that let me know that he was wasted. But when I enter the kitchen, I get this strong odor of whiskey, along with something else. Following whatever he'd been doing, Richard had evidently made this very out-of-character attempt to clean up after himself. But he hadn't been completely thorough, as on the plain white countertop, I could still make out what looked like streaks of some thick red liquid. I walk over, run my finger over a patch of it, rubbing it together between my fingers before feeling that it has a distinctly sticky texture to it. "Richard," I said, "is this blood?" "No," he replied. Suddenly I get this sudden urge to lift up the lid of the trash can, but at the same time, I'm also filled with dread. Whatever, or whoever that blood belonged to, there'd surely be remnants of it in the trash. In fact, upon seeing a small, bloody fingerprint on the trash can's lid, I'm sure that's where I'd find the remains. Then, of course, I opened the trash to see a bloody paper bag with what was clearly a stripy raccoon tail sticking out of it. During the mother of all arguments that followed, when I asked him what in God's name he was doing, he tried to palm me off with an excuse I've never, ever forgotten. He briefly stops the blender from whirring and says, "It's going to stop my heart from shrinking," then carries on grinding up this reddy brown mess of soda, ice, and what I could only assume was raccoon meat. This crazy monster thought he had some rare medical condition where his heart was basically wasting away, and the cure was to blend the organ meats of trapped animals with Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola, of all things. Like I said, that was the final straw, and by that time, another guy was living there with us too. We discussed giving Richard a kind of ultimatum, either shape up or ship out. But considering he'd reached the butchering animals and eating them raw stage of his madness, we agreed the best thing was for us to just get out of there. I called my old camp buddy that night and begged my way back into his parents' spare room. I carried on working at the Safeway for a time, got some more hours, and since I wasn't paying rent in my buddy's parents' place, getting some bus money and a security deposit was much easier. I didn't hear no more of Richard, and when I finally left San Francisco in January of '77, I never looked back. Cut to just over 2 years later, I think about March of 1979. I'm living back with my parents in Little Rock, and I've cleaned up my act, and I'm working at another grocery store with my mind set on applying to colleges. Sometimes I used to get up real early, then head down to the grocery store at around 6:30 a.m. to help the owner prep for opening hours, and a real small part of that was unpacking and arranging newspapers near the smaller front counter. I used to kind of take my time with this particular job on occasion, sipping my coffee, flicking through the sports section, all away from the prying eyes of the owner who was counting cash or whatever in his office. One morning, I catch a headline in, I think was the National Enquirer, saying something like, "Cannibal Killer's Trial Date Set." Obviously, that's not the sort of headline you read every day, so I start reading the article to get more details. And guess whose name I see, just a few lines down? Yup, my insane, crazy old roommate, Richard Chase. There's even a little picture of him in the margin, and clear as day, it's him. Same guy I lived with for the better part of 5 months. This is all from memory, so you'd have to ask Google for all the details, but here's what I remember. After I left the home I shared with Richard, his condition worsened and worsened over the course of the year, until finally in the winter of '77, he commits his first murder by randomly shooting a guy in the street. A few weeks later, he tries a home invasion, only the family isn't home, so he can't hurt anyone. So he decides to wait. But when they do get home, he gets the heebie-jeebies, turns tail, and runs. The family then arrives home to find that Richard had broken into their baby's nursery before going to the bathroom on the kid's clothes. He was absolutely sick in the head. A short time later, he tries another home invasion, and this time, he kills a pregnant woman. But here's the really messed up part. Before sleeping with her corpse, I read he put dog feces in the poor girl's mouth too. It makes you wonder what goes through a man's head to do something as absolutely insane as that. I followed the case for a while after, and I was happy when I heard he got the death penalty for the things he did. He ended up taking his own life before they could get him to the gas chamber, though. Figured he wanted to go out on his own terms. Only thing that messes with me is that some people say he wasn't crazy, that he knew what he was doing when he killed those women and did those awful things to them. I'm not saying he didn't deserve to die. That's not what I'm saying at all. Heck, I'd even kick the chair out from under that guy in a hot minute if he gave me the chance. But the only thing that's crazy is saying that he ain't. You understand me? I lived with that man. I ate with him. I tripped with him. I know Richard Chase, and the cheese slid off that boy's crackers a long time before he started killing. He was crazy as a dog in a hubcap factory the whole time I knew him, and although what he did was a tragedy, I wasn't entirely surprised by it. I feel lucky to have gotten out when I did. Hang around for another year and it might have been me getting shot dead at the side of the road. But the thing that really sticks with me isn't the survivor guilt, or whatever people want to call it. It's wondering how evil like that even comes into this world. Me and my mother were driving through our small town in southwest Virginia. My mother and father are divorced and he lives in Tennessee. They had very different viewpoints on helping out hitchhikers, as my dad was very much into hiking, camping, etc., but there was a woman walking down the road. Mind you, it's very hot outside. It's the summertime, and I noticed she was carrying a child swaddled up in a blanket, which struck me as a poor choice considering it was the middle of summer. It just seems too warm for a swaddle. So I say to my mom, "We really need to pick that lady up. Surely she isn't far from where she needs to go, but she's got a baby." And to my surprise, my mom pulls into the gas station parking lot, tells me to go in and get a large bottle of water, and we'll ask her if she'd like a ride. So, we pull out of the gas station and approach the thin, almost sickly-looking woman, and she very quietly just grabbed the door handle and got inside. Not saying anything at all, not even a thank you, which really didn't sit right with me because this is the South. Everyone is friendly and approachable, for the most part. So,
We ask where she's needing to go, and me being in the passenger seat, I turn to look at her, and she's looking down at her baby and cooing at it. She replies without ever looking up from the swaddle, being about 2 miles past the Dollar General and Jeb Stewart. And we were very close to that area. I decided to turn and speak to the woman and maybe get a conversation going. But as I get a better look at her baby, it actually was a drywall hammer wrapped up in a blanket inside another blanket. I froze. It was like I walked into a deep freezer. I told my mom that I really think we should stop because I hear what sounds like knocking and was very adamant we needed to stop at the upcoming Dollar General. As we pull in, I told my mom to get out of the car, that I needed her help to locate the noise, and we met each other at the hood of the car where I told her, "Mom, that's not a baby. She's got a hammer in that blanket." To which my mother advised me that we should walk inside to see if they had anything to help close that up, and told the woman we would be right back. We walked inside and told them to call the police so they could help this woman that we could no longer have in our vehicle, and explained why. My mother gave her some vague reason as to why we couldn't take her further, and she got out of the vehicle very angrily but almost confused, and we left her in that parking lot. She very well could have just been a really confused woman, maybe with some mental issues, but I don't know what was going on with her. But I do know that I don't think she had good intentions for us.